Welcome to another installment of the Digital Cinema Show, a series covering the art, science, and business of motion pictures. We begin this episode with an extensive interview with Oscar-nominated cinematographer Robert Yeoman, ASC. He tells us about some of the movies he's photographed, including the Grand Budapest Hotel, Spy, Moonrise Kingdom, and most recently the new Ghostbusters movie. He also relates how technology has changed the way he lights, even though his basic philosophy remains the same.
I just find the simplest thing is often the best. Lighting has become a little bit of a bad word, and no one likes to wait. How long is that going to take? And it's like, they get all anxious when you have to take 5 minutes to do something. So I find that, less is often more in today's world.
Next, we check in on post-production supervisor and post-producer Peter Mavromates. Working with David Fincher, he's been pioneering the use of higher resolution finishing on shows such as Gone Girl, House of Cards, and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Peter tells us about the challenges of dealing with higher resolutions and the benefits David Fincher realizes in the process.
And then the reason for 4K being extracted out of the 6K, which is actually what we do, is that it gives them all this post-control on framing and stabilization.
In our final segment of this episode, Seamus McGarvey, ASC, Oscar-nominated cinematographer of Atonement and Karenina, shares his feelings about camera filtration and why he feels it's so important to lock in the look on set, as well as the differences he sees between filtering for digital as compared to film.
Well, I tend to use heavier filtration in digital. With film, I'm at the lower numbers.
Continue watching to view the entire episode or use any of the separate links to jump ahead to segments that may be of particular interest to you. In either case, thank you for joining us and watching the Digital Cinema Show. We welcome your input, so please follow us on Vimeo, YouTube, or Facebook. If you would like to support our efforts, please consider also joining the Digital Cinema Society. Membership is available to anyone, whether you can afford it or not. It's always free to students, and we suggest a $30 annual contribution from those who can afford it, or a lifetime membership at $100. This episode is made possible by the generous support of OWC Digital, storage technology designed to meet the growing needs of today's production and post professionals, with products like the Thunder Bay 4 RAID 5 solution. Let's start with, it's about lighting, so let me ask you, how has the new technology in lighting changed the way that you light a scene?
It's changed quite a bit. It's kind of ironic that I'm here at the Digital Cinema Society, because I was one of the last people to join the digital world. I came into it kind of kicking and screaming. I was a film person. I love film and shot it for many years. And I've made the transition. I've come over now to the dark side and have welcomed it. My last 2 movies have been digital, and it's really been an eye-opener for me. The first digital film I shot was Spy, which we shot in Budapest. And our first scene, for those of you who have seen the film, was Jude Law plays a James Bond type character, and he's being chased through these tunnels, which were actually a brewery in Budapest. And we hung China lights, and then we put a few little accents of walls and things, and the rest of the scene was just shot on a Steadicam, chasing him through these tunnels with just the bare minimum amount of fill light that we followed the Steadicam around. And I was just amazed at just how well the cameras picked all up detail in the backgrounds. It just, really surprised me. And I remember telling Paul Feig, our director, afterwards, I said, if I had shot film, I would have lit this way differently, and it would have been a whole different experience, and it was really an eye-opener for me how well these cameras could, with the Alexa, how well it could perform in such low light, and did such a wonderful job. And it kind of has changed my thinking, because I came from film where I was used to lighting, and in particular I used to shoot anamorphic, which required a great deal of light, and just to come in and I kind of have a joke, in the old days I usually put a Kino or something behind the camera just to throw a little fill in, and with film, right before we would roll, I would always turn to the gaffer and say, maybe pull a single out, and with digital it's like put a double in, it really has allowed me to be much more daring with the lighting, and particularly working with Paul Feig on Ghostbusters and on Spy. They were comedies, but Paul was anxious that the film looked dark, and so I would light it, and he frequently would say to me, "Can we have it a little darker?" It's like, sure, that's easy. And so it's really opened up a whole new world for me, shooting digitally. And I know when I first started doing night exteriors with my gaffer, John Vecchio, we would kind of plan our lighting as if we were shooting film. And I remember one time we were doing a large night exterior, and our big guns weren't even on yet, just some of the smaller lights. And I was looking at the monitor, and it wasn't what we had kind of envisioned, but it looked so beautiful. I said, "John, let's just go with this. I mean, it looks great, And so it's really changed how I look at lighting. A lot more negative fill than what I used to do, and we frequently just go in with Kinos now, and if it's an interior, and just use the Kinos, and we don't need the big lights anymore. So it's been a whole learning curve for me shooting digitally, but as the cameras get better and better and more sensitive, it's really been an amazing journey for me as well. And I'm an Alexa guy. I love the Alexa. It looks beautiful. So I've come into the world, and I welcome it now. So.
Well, I should say in our defense, it's not the Digital Promotion Society, but we are stuck with that name now. And then we're all film lovers.
Good.
So it's not the dark side. But now, like I said, we're here to talk about lighting primarily, but I couldn't help asking you about your composition on the Grand Budapest Hotel. Shot 4x3, released 4x3, so unusual, and all the balance and symmetry. Can you talk just a little bit about your composition on that movie?
Yeah, well, I've been working with Wes Anderson since the beginning, Bottle Rocket, and when we first met many years ago, he was a young kid who'd never made a movie, and we just kind of immediately hit it off, and we talked a lot about different movies that had impacted us, and Wes, we just kind of seemed to see things the same way, and oftentimes we would go into a location and we'd kind of gravitate to the same place. And what I find with directors is, right away when you go to a location where if they say, "Oh, the camera goes here," if you're thinking the same way, you kind of go, "Okay, good, we're thinking long." But if sometimes they'll say, "Oh, the camera goes here," and it's totally different than what I had envisioned, and you're kind of in trouble in that situation, and that you're going to be kind of at odds with each other throughout the filming. But with Wes, I found that we often were just going to the same place, and he always embraced the symmetry of things, and so we even got to the point now where when we come into a room, I have my ACs run a tape from the edges of the matte box to make sure we're dead center, because I know that Wes, when he comes to the set, because we usually get there a little bit before he does, the first thing he's going to say to me is, "Are we centered?" Because oftentimes, as if you come to a room that's existing, the door might be a little off, or things might just be a little off, and we might make that adjustment with him once he's there. And when we build the sets, we build them with that symmetry in mind, and everything is made very symmetrical. So we've always kind of been on the same page with that. The 4x3, originally when we did Royal Tenenbaums, Wes wanted to shoot it in 4x3, but at that time everything was film, and it was difficult to get it projected 4x3. So we were kind of rejected with that idea, and it's only now, because we have the DI finish and the digital projectors, that we're able to kind of combine the formats into the film that we did. And at first I was a little nervous about the 4x3. It was kind of a different format than I'd always been an anamorphic person. But after we started playing around with it, I embraced it and loved it, and it just gave a whole new ideas for composition. And Wes and I looked a lot at movies shot in the 1930s just to see how the directors at that time kind of used those types of frames. And Wes likes to have a lot of actors in the same frame, which the anamorphic is very good for. But what we found is we just found new ways to cram everybody in. I mean, there's an example, Edward Norton is in the prison, he's finding the hole in the floor, and so we had him kneeling, and then we had all the people crowded around him, on different levels, and so we found new ways to play with it, and I actually grew to really love that format quite a bit.
Well, that's composition. Can you compare lighting on some of your recent films? Like the Grand Budapest Hotel seemed very theatrical and precise, and Moonrise Kingdom is a very naturalistic look. And then now you're doing the VFX picture. That must be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Well, Moonrise Kingdom, we were out in the woods for most of it, and Wes was very anxious to just run and gun and do it very quickly, available light. Occasionally we used bounce cards, and we really didn't light anything in the outside there, and we shot Super 16 because a lot of our locations we had to climb mountains and valleys and walk back in there, and he just wanted a very light camera that we weren't carrying a lot of gear and would require electricity, and so we shot that Super 16 for that reason, and we experimented with it, and he really liked the look of it as well. It was interesting, this LED thing we just saw, because on Ghostbusters, we used LEDs quite a bit for our lighting, and a lot of nights, a lot of things where we were hiding small ribbons of lights. And for the ghosts, what we found, and we did a lot of testing with this, is we created these little LED costumes, because Paul Feig, our director, was very anxious that the ghosts be real actors. And we had a variety of different rigs, some as simple as just a dolly, but oftentimes the stunt guys would do these floating rigs, and we would have these actors playing the ghosts coming in, and we had these LED costumes so that there was interactive light, and that was one thing the visual effects people said is it's a real giveaway, and the problem they've had on some of their movies is when you don't have that interactive light, you try to create it in post, and it really doesn't work so well. So we did a great deal of testing, and so we would have, they were like sleeves and legs, and we even had little helmets that these people wore, and it just gave a whole different interacting lighting to a scene as they kind of floated into the room. I might add, while we're on the subject, it's and I noticed with that camera, like that was flickering, and when we were doing Spy in Budapest, we were doing a lot of night stuff, and it's a 50 hertz country, and we were having all sorts of flicker problems. And it was really a real advantage to shooting digitally, because we could see it live, what lights were flickering. We could try to dial them out, and if there was a particular light that we couldn't get rid of, we could somehow figure a way to turn it off or block it. And if I had shot film, the nightmare, a lot of it you can't see on the film until you get it back, and it would have been a nightmare, because we had so much flicker issues there in Budapest. And with the digital cameras, we were able to kind of spot them on the day and just kind of adjust for them, and it was really saved us a lot of time and energy and pain.
Are there any tips you can share?
Less is more. I find early in my career, I like many cinematographers, I would tend to get nervous and overlight, and I just find the simplest thing is often the best. And so I find that often I like to do a big soft source kind of from the side, and that allows the actors to move around and maybe not hit their, in today's world, the actors don't hit their marks quite like they used to, and it gives us a lot more flexibility. And so I often will do a big source from the side, and then, as I said earlier, I like to do a 4x4 Kino over the camera, and I often put some 216 on it, and just adjust the fill level right from there. And if I need a lot more, I'll put all 4 on, and many times we just get down to 1, if that's all you need. And it's just this very simple way of lighting, and it looks beautiful and very natural. And these digital cameras are so sensitive in the low end that you oftentimes don't even need fill, whereas film I would have put a lot more fill in for sure.
Well, it's all about the right tool for the job, like whether it's Super 16 or digital or anamorphic. But as far as lighting, you're starting to become fond of the LEDs, but is there an old-fashioned light that they'd have to pry out of your cold dead
I
hands?
still love the old Mo Richardson tungsten lights, the 1Ks, the 650s, the 2Ks. I mean, I love those lights, the 20K. You know, I mean, they're beautiful lights. But I just recently, on Ghostbusters, we did the LED space lights, and it was amazing because we had a ton of them up there. I don't remember how many we used, but they don't get hot, so the stage didn't get hot, and they gave you so much more control. And so my gaffer John Vecchio kind of had found them and wanted to use them, and he converted me to them very quickly.
One right up here.
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're beautiful, and as the technology changes, we're heading more in that direction. And like I said, those LEDs, we just, in these hard, tiny spaces, we would just put a few LED strips up, and it would look beautiful. And so I find that, less is often more in today's world.
Well, let me ask you, what's your next project? You can talk about it.
Yeah, I've been doing commercials. I got back from Ghostbusters. I was in Boston for 6 months, and I'm up for a movie that I'll find out Tuesday. I don't want to jinx it, but it's The Little Mermaid. It's a film. They're doing a live-action film, and it's shooting in England. So I'm waiting to hear on that, and if that doesn't happen, I'm sure something else will happen. So.
Well, I know you stay really busy. We're so lucky to have you, and that
no.
you took this time for us. Thank you
Not at all.
so much.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure. I've known this guy a long time. He's a great guy.
What an endorsement. I'm really excited. We have a special guest, a long time member of the Digital Cinema Society. What he's famous for is being a post-production producer, post-supervisor, and for the last number of years, you've worked a lot with David Fincher. This is Peter Mavromates. Did I pronounce it correctly? David Fincher, Gone Girl, finished in 4K. The TV show, what's that you've been working on? House of Cards, 4K. And you also did a little movie called Curious Case of Benjamin Button, et cetera, et cetera. And not all.
Not 4K, HD.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
You've really been pushing the boundaries. David is one of the first ones that is bothering to finish on 4K. When you first did that, nobody was even thinking about it. Why do we need 4K? So tell us, why does David Fincher need 4K? How does he use it? What are the benefits?
Well, when we finish on 4K these days, we're actually shooting on 6K, which is part of the answer. And David, as you know, is one of the master craftsmen, and he's anyone who knows his work knows that one of the trademarks is the high quality. And so that's one of the reasons for 4K. And then the reason for 4K being extracted out of the 6K, which is actually what we do, is that it gives him all this post-control on framing and stabilization, which we do a lot of on his shows. And so it adds, this other layer of just hyper quality that you see. I think Gone Girl is probably the supreme example up to this point. We just keep doing more and more polishing of the work.
So he shoots everything a little wider than he would want to, or that he imagines, and then he can finesse it in post-production?
That's correct. So they've got, they've got framing grids on the cameras that tell where that 4K area is. When we go and create our edit media, we're not cutting in 6K, but we're cutting with the full aspect ratio. And so Kirk, our editor, can actually reframe in offline mode. So he's got the entire frame, the full aspect of the original capture there. And so we're looking at that framing all the way from day one until we finish.
And how does stabilization work? I know that's another reason.
Stabilization, we have, just a handful of guys who are sitting in the next room, and whenever David does move the camera, it's never perfect. Even though we may have the best camera operators or whatever, there's always that little hitch, about 100 frames in or whatever, or if the camera is really moving, and the actors are moving in front of a moving camera, sometimes the framing is just not quite where David wants it, and so he'll tell the edit team like where the head should be in relation to the frame, and they'll go do a couple passes of stabilization. if you know David's work really well, you know that he also locks down the camera quite a bit. But when he starts moving it, his standards are incredibly high. Yeah.
So for the people who might not understand it, you have to use a little bit of extra screen position to stabilize because you're moving.
That's right. If we shot
frames,
right, if we shot 4K and then we were going to deliver 4K and we had to stabilize, we would have to actually blow up the image because otherwise, when you stabilize, you run out of frame. So you'll start seeing the edge. You'll see black. You'll see nothing. And so we have all that extra real estate to be able to do fairly extreme stabilization.
So there are some advantages, but there must be a lot of challenges as well, working with all this data.
Yeah, well, I think, when the whole stabilization thing started coming in, it was very intimidating because of the processing time and the amount of media that we need to store, because now we're storing multiple shots multiple times, and we're doing a lot of stabilization during offline, so we're doing way many more shots than we actually end up with in the movie. But one of the things that's been happening over the last couple of years is that storage has become a lot more affordable. Processing speeds are really starting to ramp up. And so those technical limitations are starting to disappear. I mean, obviously they'll come back into play because we always want more, and now we want more color depth and that sort of thing. And so now we'll be short of processing speed again. But I'm an optimist, and I know that next year will be faster than this year, no matter what it is that we're doing.
Sure, there's many in the industry that are probably angry at you for pushing the bar up so high. Now we're all forced to finish on 4K, and maybe some people weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
Anything else you can tell us about the overall approach? How much data are you actually working with? Are you shooting uncompressed?
We're shooting, I believe it's 5:1 on the reds, yeah. And I actually don't have any data on how much we've shot. I can tell you that our cutting room has about 360 terabytes of storage that we're working with. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I think that about 60 of that are SSDs so that there's just no lag with the Adobe in Kirk's room. That was initial. Gone Girl was a big experiment with Adobe, cutting on Premiere. And so they were there sort of day and night with us as we tried to get the speed and everything all working with Jeff Brew and his open drives. And so at one point we thought there'd be this great advantage that Kirk's media would all be on SSDs, which wasn't necessarily a requirement for the other parts of our pipeline, like the stabilization guys and all that.
Well, where do you see things going for the future?
A lot more in-house stuff. That's what we've been trying to do. We were working on a sitcom that David was doing for HBO, which ended up getting canceled. But on that particular show, we were going to do high dynamic range color correction in-house. And so that's sort of my little pet peeve right now is high dynamic range, because when I see these displays that have high dynamic range, I mean, they just change the way I look at everything. And I brought David in probably, I guess it was a year before that sitcom anyway, over to Dolby to look at it, and he totally got it as well. And Dolby said he's the first filmmaker to come in and say, "Is like, well, now that I know this, I would shoot differently."
So let's talk about your workflow. I think you started with NextLab PhotoChem's
yes,
on-set
that's
system.
correct. Yes,
and then you brought it, and you're actually cutting the 4K right there at your edit room, in the office.
We're pulling 4K. Yes, yeah. We pull all our own media, which is very funny. I found this one artist that we use in house, who had worked on actually children's shows with my wife. That's how I found him. But he hadn't really worked in art, sort of in movies and that sort of thing. And he got spoiled because I would come in and talk to him about a shot, and then 20 minutes later, he'd have the full res media to work with. Now he's off on another movie that's not us, and it takes him 5 days to get the media. So he now knows what it's really like out there. But yes, we pull all our own stuff. Yeah.
And then you go back to the lab for any mezzanine formats or deliverables. I guess that's the only thing you leave to the lab.
Well, we still do tend to go to a DI house. We've worked very closely with Light Iron, and that's one of the ways that they come into play is when it does get to all those deliverables. That's really helpful. They have all pipeline that streamlines that stuff, and they know how to read deliverable specs from all the studios.
So you're doing like negative cutting in the office on the desktop.
Yes.
And then you go to a facility to
color correct. Yeah.
deliverables.
Now we were going to do color correction on the House of I'm sorry, on Idiosyncrasy was the name of the sitcom. But even then, I'd already talked to Light Iron about how I wanted to take that flow into Light Iron, and then that would be the house that would deliver everything and wrap it all up nicely for all the delivery departments in town.
Any comments you'd want to leave with people? Give them a better understanding of where this is going?
Well,
your experience?
I mean, if I had my fantasy, really, what I really want is I want to live in a world where we capture the media, we upload it to somewhere, and then that's the end of it. Everything is just banging on that whatever you want to call it, that cloud or whatever, so that that file is servicing an offline data room while it's simultaneously servicing a color correction base somewhere, and that's my idea. I just want to live in a world where there's one upload and then that's it.
Peter, thank you so much.
Very good. Thanks.
Well, I tend to use heavier filtration in digital. With film, I'm at the lower numbers, and I think that with digital, if I'm shooting on, I have an Alexa XT, for instance, and I find that it cuts through, the sensor kind of cuts through the diffusion quicker. So I tend to be up the higher numbers when I'm using those sorts of diffusions. It's interesting actually talking about digital and film and the use of filtration, because I've always liked to use color filters whenever I can. I really like the statement of intent that using color creates, and it's quite different actually when you put real light through real glass. It is a different look to grading a film with a particular color hue. The way the filtration works affects subtly all the other colors within the frame, and it creates unexpected results that you can see with your eye as you look through the filter, and that's something that sometimes you miss when you're grading a film in the digital intermediate. The digital filtration just doesn't have the same natural feel, and it's something that I try to, particularly color grads or even the warming filters, the corals or the 812, for instance, is a filter I use a lot, even on digital. It's interesting, I grew up as a cinematographer having to do it all in camera, you really, and I love that idea of baking in your intention as a cinematographer, and that involves the choice of stock, the type of processing you're going to use, and it extends to filtration as well. And I really love, even with warming or cooling filters, grads, and to put it on the camera, and the director knows, the producers know what you're going for. It's a look that, for instance, on the hours, that we really tested each look and were very specific about the type of filtration that was used. And it creates an atmosphere on the set, because there you have it right in front of you, what you're getting. When you look through that camera, you're seeing what you're going to get. And I love that, because doing it all in post is very dangerous for a start, because oftentimes you're not there, the cinematographer is not around in post. So the paradigm of possibilities that can be introduced in terms of filtration or the direction that your film is going to take in color terms is kind of scary. So I love the idea of doing it in